In 1649 to St. George's Hill, a ragged band they called the Diggers came to show the people's will.
Let me impart some information about this room. It's called the Henry Schmidt Room. Henry Schmidt was the first president of the ILWU. And a strike that started here in 1934 spread up and down the coast. The ILA, which we were a member of at that time, was controlled by a very reactionary leadership in New York, class collaborationist to the hilt, worked with the employers overtime. The president, Joe Ryan, flew out here to try to stop what was an impending strike, and he failed. And Henry Schmidt was one of the people that led that strike that eventually, in a few years, broke from the corrupt and gangster-ridden ILA on the East Coast and established the ILWU, which was one of the leading maritime unions in the Congress of Industrial Organizations. That was the militant wing of organized labor in America at that time. So we're here today to honor Howard Keylor, whose contributions to the working class and oppressed are legendary. Paramount in his lifelong dedication to class struggle is his initiative and supportive role in demonstrations, in strikes, and picket lines. The founders of the ILWU were inspired by the Russian Revolution, the first successful workers' revolution. That was not, Henry Schmidt was the leader, one of the leaders here in San Francisco, but there were also others who played a leading role in that strike. Harry Bridges and Jermaine Bulkey was another one. Jermaine Bulkey was part of a group called the Albion Hall group. And most of those guys were leftists of one kind or another. Communists, socialists, anarcho-syndicalists like the Wobblies. And initially they all supported the Russian Revolution, the new government that came out of that revolution. And I remember when I first came into this union as a B-man, we were inducted into the union, but we had to do educationals. I understand now that they don't require newer members to be educated about our militant history. Well, the fact of the matter is that our history is a shining example of what class struggle means in America. In fact, in the early stages of the Russian Revolution, all leftist trade unionists were supporting this new idea that capitalism could be overthrown and establish a workers' government. Socialized medicine and the factories were expropriated, and workers in this country supported that. They saw that there's another way of living, that we don't have to suffer under the depredations of capitalism. And so that strike in 1934 was about the hiring hall. And what happened in 1934 was massive demonstrations on the part of the working class. The organized part of the working class were longshoremen, seamen, and a lot of people forget that the seamen played an instrumental role in that struggle. And other workers as well. And so we don't want to forget that. And so there were martyrs that happened in 1934. And that's why every July 5th, we celebrate or commemorate those martyrs. Bloody Thursday is what we call it. And every port on the West Coast goes down in memory of those fallen comrades. So this room, I don't want to use the word sacred, but it's important in our history. This is where all the militant actions were initiated, because this is where the executive board met. This is where the activists in our local, with community activists, met. In fact, I should just mention one important thing that I just found out minutes ago. The labor historian for the ILWU, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, is Harvey Schwartz. Harvey, will you stand up for a minute, please? Harvey Schwartz is our historian. And he just got off the BART train on Market Street and told me, Jack, he said, do you know who's marching on Market Street today? I said, no. He said, the Proud Boys are marching with their armbands. Yes, this is a union town. This is not the first time fascists tried to march on San Francisco in recent history. In 2017, Patriot Prayer tried to hold a rally on Crissy Field. And this local, at a meeting, the executive board decided that we are going to stop them. We're not going to allow fascists. This is not free speech. This is intimidation. This is about people lynching blacks in the South and police killing blacks inordinately. And not only white cops, but also Latino and black cops. The point is that they're cops. And I'm proud of one important thing in the Constitution of Local 10, and that is that we refused, I put it in the past tense, we refused to allow cops to become members of this local. They're not part of the working class. That's the good news. Now, I have to say that one of our newer members, Joel Shore, informed me that actually there are a couple of cops who became members. This is part of what's happening to the most radical longshore union in the country. We too, we don't live in a vacuum, and we're affected by these changes going on. So to go back to Henry Schmidt in this room, in '89, when I came down to the waterfront, one of the last survivors of that monumental struggle was Jermaine Bulkey. And he was probably a little older than me. He couldn't speak very well, didn't remember things. I'm getting to understand that now. And he recounted what happened in 1934. Education is important because it prepares us for the battles ahead. Well, not just ahead, but that confront us today. When the Proud Boys march in San Francisco, we need to do what we did in 2017, which is mobilize not only our union, but all the unions in the city to stop these fascists from coming into San Francisco. So I'm going to begin today's program introducing the first speaker. Here we go. The former international president of the ILWU, Brian McWilliams. Brian was the last socialist president of the ILWU. Hopefully not the last, but he doesn't mind being identified that way. We want to see new socialist leadership in the ILWU. So Brian was the one who sent me to Liverpool because there was an important strike going on in Liverpool. Steve Zeltzer from Labor Video Project informed me about that. I went to Brian and said, Brian, there's an important strike going on in Liverpool. Can we go there? he said, yeah, Jack, I want you to go there when you're there for the ITF. It was a conference for the International Transport Workers Federation. And he said, you can go to Liverpool and express international solidarity with their struggle, because they were isolated by their own union bureaucracy that was implementing Thatcher's anti-labor laws. That's Brian McWilliams. He understood the importance of labor solidarity. And I took Howard. Howard came along with me to that conference, and we met the most militant dock workers leaders around the world. He also spoke at a big rally that maybe some of the younger people in the audience don't remember. There was a rally against the WTO in Seattle in 1999. And he was prominent in that rally and spoke against the multinational corporations that were oppressing workers around the world. I think probably the most significant action that I can recall that Brian initiated or supported was in 1999, when we had a massive protest here in the city. We demanded freedom for Mumia Abu-Jamal. That came out of this room, the Henry Schmidt room, where the executive board voted to bring a resolution to the Longshore Caucus. That's sort of a convention of the Longshore Division of the ILWU, to shut down every port on the West Coast. And we, Local 10 and Local 34, the clerk's local, led a march of 25,000 people through the streets of San Francisco demanding freedom for Mumia Abu-Jamal. And that kind of impact, with ILWU playing a leadership role, would not have happened without Brian McWilliams in the driver's seat up there. Thank you. Brian, come on, say it.
Well, we're actually here to celebrate Howard, so I don't want to divert from that. Really, I appreciate.
Howard was a part of that. I forgot to mention.
Yeah. Okay. Howard is a very important part of all this. It's he's one of the kind of people that have made it all happen over the years. Now I am. Oh, pardon me. Closer to the mic. I understand. Thank you for that. I'm Brian McWilliams. I'm a retired ILWU member, past president of the ILWU, and I'm here to share with you memories of Howard and the impact he had on so many of us personally and our organization. My first memories of him were standing in the pay line at the Ferry Building on Fridays in the late 60s, when he would be handing out leaflets. I'm sorry to say that I didn't save any of those leaflets or my paychecks. But when workers struggle every day with the everyday hardships of work and life, there's not a lot of time for reflection on the state of the world. In spite of that, Howard was able to identify and condense issues into something which so many of us could personally identify with, become informed about, and spread the word. He was a dedicated teacher. He and those like him fed the incubator of activism, and which can only best be fomented when workers gather together. And once again, he's accomplished that. In reading about his life experience, I was reminded of a poem written by a longshore contemporary of his, George Benet. And I would like to read that to you now. It's titled, Daughter. When she was a young girl, she asked, Father, do you know the people of Nigeria have swamps full of malaria? What do I know about Nigerians? My tears are for my own dad with his carbide lamp. following a small donkey into endless tunnels, into his coffin of beams lined with anthracite. My tears are for a seaman who loses his grip on a mast and falls screaming to the cold steel deck. Flesh is so soft and the steel hard and cold. My tears are for 6 longshoremen killed in a crane accident, men who drank beer on Saturday nights, bet only at the $2 window, screwed from birth. My tears are for the sailors at the bottom of Kula Gulf, USS Helena, dear, dear girl. My tears splash against Kilambangara, Savo Island, where I served my apprenticeship with death. I speak for sailors, longshoremen, miners. I'm competent only to cry for them. What do I know about Nigerians? What do I know of the dreams and desires of young girls? Well, I certainly believe that Howard did indeed shed tears for Nigerians, but he was able to stay focused on issues which workers could personally identify with here. He was passionate in his beliefs, and lucky for us, the ILWU, our union was a friendly and supportive incubator to build support for issues vitally impacting our lives and the communities around us. He certainly could have written a similar poem, and there's so much more to reflect upon today. We have an opportunity now to hear more about his insatiable drive to see justice done and his relentless energy, and also to lament the passing of our militant brother. Thank you.
So now we're going to hear and see a message. Oh, thanks. A message from Angela Davis, who couldn't be here for this. Angela's an honorary member of Local 10, by the way. And if you see that red framed picture of her, we were the first union to rally and demand freedom for Angela Davis. And we held that rally right here in our union hall. So I'm very proud of that. And now, can we hear from Angela Davis, please? Sound.
As an honorary member of ILWU, guys, for not being able to be there for Brother Howard Keylor's memorial. But I would like to join Comrade Irvin Jim of the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa and the Dockers of Red Liverpool in sharing some thoughts on Brother Howard Keylor's life. Born in Appalachia in 1925, 100 years ago, he began his activism in the labor movement in Stockton. In 1948, along with his wife Evangelina, he participated in the Filipino farm workers' asparagus strike. He became a longshoreman in 1953. As a member of the Militant Caucus, a class struggle rank-and-file group of longshore and warehouse workers, he helped organize actions protesting the shipment of cargo to the juntas in Chile and El Salvador in the 1970s. I will always remember the ILWU Local 10 strike against the ship from South Africa in 1984. I participated in that historic action in San Francisco, which was initiated by Brother Keylor and amended by Brother Leo Robinson. His revolutionary commitment of solidarity with oppressed people continued through the 90s. when he helped organize port strikes against Zionist-owned Zim lines, which now no longer calls in the port of Oakland, laying the basis, of course, for longshore workers to refuse to load military cargo for Israel's genocidal war on the Palestinian people. In 1999, Brother Keylor, a member of the Labor Action Committee to free Mumia Abu Jamal, helped to organize the march of 25,000 led by Local 10 through the streets of San Francisco, demanding freedom for Mumia. I also participated in that strike, in that march. We need to continue the struggle to free Mumia and all political prisoners. As you know, I was also once a political prisoner, and ILWU Local 10 was the first union to demand free Angela at a rally in their union hall. Finally, when we build a movement to abolish all prisons, Howard will be there with us in spirit. I send you comradely greetings and wish you a fruitful memorial for our working class warrior, Brother Howard Keylor.
There you go.
He well deserves it.
Thank you, Angela. We had a tribute to Howard here in 2018, not that long ago. And Howard was here, already up in his 90s, in a wheelchair, and he was very moved by a song that he heard. Well, it was one of his favorite songs. And the person who sang it was Maxina Ventura. She's here today, as she's going to sing Howard's favorite song, the Diggers song. Thank you.
In 1649 to St. George's Hill, a ragged band they called the Diggers came to show the people's will. They defied the landlords, they defied the laws. They were the dispossessed, reclaiming what was theirs. We come in peace, they said, to dig and sow. We come to work the land in common and to make the wastelands grow. This earth divided we will make whole, so it can be a common treasury for all. The sin of property we do disdain. No one has any right to buy or sell the earth for private gain. By theft and murder they took the land. Now everywhere the walls rise up at their command. They make the laws to chain us well. Their clergy dazzle us with heaven, or they damn us into hell. We will not worship the God they serve, the God of greed who feeds the rich while poor folks starve. We work, we eat together, we need no swords. We will not bow to the masters or pay rent to the lords. We are free people, though we are poor. You diggers all stand up for glory, stand up now. From the men of property, the orders came. They sent their hired men and troopers to wipe out the diggers' claim, tear down their cottages, destroy their corn. They were dispersed, but still their vision lingers on. You poor take courage, you rich take care. This earth was made a common treasury for everyone to share. All things in common, all people one. We come in peace, they came to tear the cottage down. We work, we eat together, we need no swords. This earth was made a common treasury for all of us to share, all things in common, all people one. You diggers all stand up for glory, stand up now. You diggers all stand up for glory, stand up now. And I'm sorry, getting very emotional. On his 93rd birthday, he was sitting right there in the wheelchair, and probably most people who might have been at that event might not have seen, but he was crying. He was crying as I sang that song, because that's him. That's what he was about.
I was going to mention that exactly what Maxina said. It was very moving. And I looked over to see Howard, and tears were running down his eyes. He did that twice during that tribute to him. Not once for your singing the Digger song, and another time when his daughter Aloha came up and recounted what it was like living in Stockton and being a brown girl. Her mother was Filipino, and her father, Howard, was German-American. And I think she was waiting, or Howard was in an unemployment line or something like that. And she very passionately, but a subtle emotion, said, "You don't know what it's like when people stare at you and you're a little brown girl and your father is white." Something like that. I couldn't say it any better than that, but it brought tears to Howard's eyes. So with that, the next we're going to see a film put together by his other daughter, Isis. It's called Hot Cargo Video, and it documents in film the role that Howard played in so many of these significant class battles. Hot Cargo Video, please.
All friends.
San Francisco, it's more than symbolic. Longshoremen from Local 10 are hitting South African and American businesses in the pocketbook. They're vowing not to touch the South African cargo on this Dutch ship, even though tonight a federal judge is telling the workers they have to
To hell with the laws, to hell with the injunctions. I believe that that's what's necessary.
This is more than just another demonstration. This is a challenge to our system of free enterprise. Here you have millions of dollars worth of goods on a ship back there, and people here saying that if you do business with South Africa, you can't do it here.
This money is made off the most extreme exploitation of the black people in South Africa. Families are divided, people are being pushed out. It's like if you were in California and people were pushed out on the Mojave Desert and put in tin shacks with no way to grow food and no way to live, and they die. Every minute in South Africa, a child under 5, on the average, dies of starvation.
What appears to be certain legal action against their union and an arbitrator's ruling that'll hold back guaranteed weekly pay, longshoremen are still refusing to handle the cargo from South Africa. Remaining in the holds of the Dutch vessel, the steel, coal, glass, wool, and auto parts scheduled to have been unloaded here, along with some cargo from Australia.
I've been aboard this ship 3 times, and I'll work any other. Matter of fact, I was in the gang that discharged the Australian cargo. We have no quarrel with the people of Australia. We have no quarrel with Ned Lloyd lines. We have a quarrel with the South African government.
At a dockside rally this morning, longshoremen and supporters repeated their feelings about the reports of life in South Africa, which they regard as oppressive.
It's got the blood of the courageous youth in Soweto that stood up against the vicious, racist apartheid regime.
The longshoremen are saying that this is a matter of conscience to them. It's a reaction to the recent oppression of labor leaders in South Africa, the detention, the torture, even the killings of people who have spoken out against the policies of apartheid. The Pacific Maritime Association is taking its case against the union to the federal courts to force the unloading of the cargo, in spite of the longshoremen's contention that this is the action of individual members. While the dockside rally kept the gates of Pier 80 closed, a floating picket line by a group called the Peace Navy paraded on the bay side of the ship, telling anyone looking from that side why the cargo is being ignored.
Boycott of South African cargo in 1984 at Pier 80 for 11 days. In that situation, the longshoremen took the dispatch, went to the job, looked at the cargo, told the employer, we do not work South African cargo, and turned around and went home. This happened twice a day. Each ship changed for 11 days until the employers got a federal court injunction. The boycott was over. There was a large group of people outside both morning and evening, but these were in support of the longshore actions. But it was a longshore courage in deliberately violating the Taft-Hartley law and the union contract that made that successful. This was a result of over a decade of education within the local on the horrors of the South African apartheid regime. So that the membership was well educated. And what actually precipitated the action was when South Africa arrested the entire leadership of the Black Miners Union and charged them with treason, were threatening to execute them. And that precipitated the action when I made the motion to, in Local 10, which passed unanimously, not to work the cargo on the next ship that came in. That's what happened in '84.
Demonstrators who tried to block the unloading of cargo from South Africa. It happened on Pier 80. Riot squads, as you see, moved in on 200 protesters. They were pushed out of the way and trucks moved in to unload the ship. But some dock workers who support the protesters said the city of San Francisco is not following its own rules against apartheid.
The hypocrisy of this administration of this city. We're passing paper resolutions against apartheid, then using the police force to remove people and workers who are trying to strike an economic blow against that regime.
We salute members of the International Longshoremen and Warehousemen Union Local 10. Who refused to unload a South African cargo ship in 1984. In response to this demonstration, other workers, church people, community activists, and educators gathered each day at the docks to express their solidarity with the dock workers. They established themselves as the front line of the anti-apartheid movement in the Bay Area.
All right, wow. Thank you, Isis, for that important video. This is not just a memorial. The program is set up to educate newer, younger longshore workers coming into the industry. And so the video that's being made here will be shown to them so they understand that all struggles aren't won. But if you never struggle, you'll never win. That's right. And that's what the next speaker is going to... My good friend and comrade, who's worked on the executive board with me for many years in putting together class struggle actions, Clarence Thomas, the real Clarence Thomas. You once gave me this to read. Should I read it or is this okay? I forgot.
No, that's okay. That's all right.
Okay. Okay. Sorry.
Solidarity greetings, brothers and sisters, friends, comrades, and others. I'd like to first congratulate Jack and those that were responsible for making this memorial happen today. Let's give them a round of applause. This is a full house. The other thing that I would like to do before I get started is that I would like to recognize those in the room who participated in the 1984 action and even actions prior to that. I see my brother Larry Wright. With all of those who participated, whether or not you were Local 10 or not, would you please stand, please? So many of us are not able to be here today or who have passed on. It is so great. I'm very grateful to be here today myself. I'd like to take personal privilege to say to each and every one of you who are in the audience or who are listening, please get your shingles vaccine. I have been impacted by this scourge going on now for 4 months in my left eye. And I'm grateful to be here today. Thank goodness for the ILWU's tremendous health care, and pension. All of us who are members of the ILWU appreciate that. Let me first of all say, brother and comrade Howard Keylor's career on the waterfront started as a casual in Stockton in 1953. During the era of anti-communism and blacklisting, this was 3 years following the introduction of the Magnuson Act of 1950 to screen so-called subversives during the lead-up to the Korean War. The primary targets were the International Longshore and Warehouse Union and the Marine Cooks and Stewards because of their militant and progressive histories. The ILWU opposed the act and fought against it in court. The ILWU is one of the few places where men and women who shared Howard's politics could find work and be defended by the union. As we all know, Howard was a Bolshevik. He was a member of the International Bolshevik Tendency, a Marxist organization, fighting for international working class revolution to overthrow capitalism. He's very upfront about that. Antonio Francesco Gramsci, the Italian Marxist philosopher, linguist, and journalist, once wrote, quote, "A trade union is not a predetermined phenomenon. It takes on a definite form to the extent that the strength and will of the workers who are its members impress a policy and propose an aim to define it," unquote. Howard Keylor was such a member of ILWU Local 10. This can best be exemplified by the motion put forward by Brother Keylor and passed by the executive board to boycott South African cargo on the Ned Lloyd Kimberley. Quote, "For 11 days in November through December 1984, the Ned Lloyd Kimberley, full of cargo from South Africa, sat and rusted in San Francisco Harbor as 300 longshoremen refused to touch the apartheid freight on board. This dramatic act of militant labor solidarity with the embattled black masses of South Africa by members of ILWU Local 10 sent a powerful message that reverberated worldwide and was hailed by Nelson Mandela as having, quote, "established the ILWU on the front line of the anti-apartheid movement." The Longshore Action was actively supported throughout by hundreds who rallied at the gates of Pier 80 to show their solidarity. Howard was not only a trade unionist and political activist, but he had a revolutionary profile that was manifested by his social practice, from opposing vicious apartheid in South Africa to standing in solidarity in opposing Zionist Israeli apartheid and supporting the Palestinian struggle. This contributed in shaping ILWU Local 10's militant and, yes, revolutionary character. Speaking as an African-American trade unionist, Clarence Thomas, Howard's anti-racist political and social consciousness is indeed instructive to white trade unionists and others. We have recently witnessed leaders of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters and the International Longshoremen Association kissing the hand of Donald J. Trump. This reminds me of how pervasive racism and white supremacy is not only amongst the white working class, but specifically the labor movement. All rank and file members of unions must be willing to embrace leftist politics to support rank and file unity, democracy, and an anti-racist agenda. The actions of trade unionists willing to saddle up with neo-white fascists show the lack of class struggle, working class consciousness, which is what Howard exemplified throughout his life. That's right. Brother Keylor's understanding of the relationship between race and class was shared by Harry Bridges and others who sought the solidarity of the black community to support the waterfront strike of 1934. They were communists, leftists, and anti-racists who believed in rank-and-file unity and democracy. It's the radical and anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, and anti-racist politics that has contributed to building the long and glorious militant tradition of the ILWU Local 10. The memorial today is not only honoring Howard's memory and legacy, but also making it known to the working class, oppressed and abroad, what his commitment to the struggle was all about. Thank you. I want to say one quick thing before I get off. I know I'm taking a little time. I'm taking shingles time, okay? I want to say something that many of you may not know. I wasn't in the room. I think that Brother Lawrence Tebow was. When that resolution put forward by Howard Keylor to boycott South Africa, what many of you may not know is that that wasn't the first effort that Howard made to take such action. He even confessed that he was surprised when the action took place, when that was passed. And I understand that as a radical who put forth a lot of resolutions, as well as Jack Hayman. And we've seen them go down in flames, but on a certain occasion, they would pass. I just want to close out and say this. This is to the white left, who are beyond the scope of this room. You cannot think that you are anti-racist simply because you embrace slogans or put things on the computer. You have to demonstrate that by your social practice and actions. And I would hope all of those who are listening today would take heed to that. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Thank you so much.
Unfortunately, I did not give Brother Thomas the adequate introduction that I should have given. But let me just say, this local is known around the world as the Red and Black Union. Red because of our politics, and black because of our racial composition. Brother Clarence Thomas's activism started over a half a century ago when he was in the Black Student Union at San Francisco State. And they conducted a strike there, the longest strike in the history of any student strike in this country. Clarence became a member of the Black Panther Party. And he brought a lot of that politics into our local. He was a third-generation retired member and officer of ILWU Local 10. He's an author and co-founder of Declare Publishing with he and his wife. He's also a member of the executive board of the ILWU Bay Pensioners Club, of which Lawrence Tebow was the president, and he retired from the waterfront, but not from the struggle. One last point that wasn't put on here for me to read is he also was co-chair of the Million Worker March that marched on Washington, D.C. in 2004 to give an independent voice to politics in this country, a working class voice. So thank you, Clarence.
Thank you, Jeff.
Okay, let me diverge a little bit from my program. Come on up, Lawrence. I know you've been waiting a long time. Lawrence Tebow, president of the Pensioners Club here. He's one of the first people to be up here. He's a longtime officer in the ILWU. He was a business agent back in the 70s and 80s. He was president of Local 10 back in the 90s and into the 2000s. He, as president of the Pensioners Club, put forward a resolution that when our delegation which was about to go to South Africa, that when we're there, we would engage the leadership of the largest union in South Africa that Angela referred to, the National Union of Metalworkers, that we would engage them and ask them to demonstrate, as Clarence was saying, not just words, but demonstrate to demand freedom for America's most well-known political prisoner, Mumia Abu-Jamal. And Newt, who's going to be here later today, I hope, Newt and I met with the leadership, Irvin Jim. And not only did they write a letter to this Judge Clemens, a black attorney, corporate attorney, who, of course, ruled in favor of the state and denied Mumia a new trial or released him from prison because all the evidence was phony. They wrote a letter to the judge. They had a demonstration in front of the U.S. Embassy in Pretoria, dancing and singing and demanding freedom for Mumia Abu-Jamal. And then finally, Irvin Jim made a video for all trade unions around the world that went viral to demand freedom for Mumia Abu-Jamal. So, thank you, Lawrence. Will you please come up and say a few words, give them some history, and remember, the younger members are going to listen to what you've got to say.
Greetings to everyone. I joined this organization in 1967. And when I first got involved coming to the union meetings, one of the outstanding person that was always on the mic talking about social issues was Howard Keylor. And at the time he had a partner with him, which was Stan Gow. And the two of them would get on the microphone and inform us of what was going on outside of the hiring hall. And you know, when you're young or you think about it's going to work and taking care of your family, and you don't really realize what's going on around you because you're so busy trying to accumulate things, making babies and things of that sort. And it's the truth, okay? So your mind is on different things. However, when you come to the union meeting, Howard would be there talking about issues outside of the working people and giving us the education on what needed to be done. And I want to talk about two things that stand out beside the South African issue, was that for many years we worked at a company called Pasha, which was a steel company in Richmond. And it had a contract with Harry Bridges that said as the workers retired, the longshoremen would take over those jobs. And the jobs we had while they were in charge is when the steel would fall on the deck of the ships, we would get hired to pick up the steel and throw it into the hatch because it was unsafe to be on deck. And we did that for many years. And then another company took over called Levin's Terminal. And Levin stopped ordering longshoremen to work on their job. And we went to find out what was going on. And they said that, well, we're bringing our own people and we don't want no longshoremen on this job. Well, we had a meeting, and I believe Howard Keylor came up and said we need to shut the port down and go tell Levin's who in the hell's the boss around here. Which is what happened. We actually refused work on all the terminals, day and night, and all the longshoremen showed up in Richmond to let Levin's know that no port work is going to take place until we resolve this issue with them. And what finally happened, and it was not really a good victory, is that the company says, okay, we will pay you to show up, but we don't want you on the ship. So members would get dispatched. We'd go to the office, and they would say, okay, that's your turnaround time, go home. And they would pay us 8 hours. They did this for about 5 years, and then one day, Levin says, hey, you know, that's racketeering. Why are we paying you and you're not working? And at the same time, we were working at Sense of Steel. We were doing the work at Sense of Steel. And he took us to the National Labor Relations Board, and they found we were guilty of feather bedding or something of that sort. And we lost the case. We didn't have no more show-up time. The only thing we do at Levin's terminal now is tie ships up and let them go. Then Sense of Steel says, we don't want longshoremen either. So we lost those jobs. And last was we had an incident where one of our members was tagged by the KKK in Richmond. And Howard Keylor made a motion that we would hire armed guards and patrol that area to make sure that those people didn't get hurt. And what they did was a shotgun through the window and almost hit the children there. And that went on for about 7 months, and we finally determined who those people were. They lived in a cul-de-sac street around the corner, and they didn't like black people. So those are some of the things that remind me of Howard Keylor during my time. And my time is up, I'm told.
Thank you, Lawrence. If I could, I'd like to make one correction, because I talked to Howard about the time a local 10 member's house was threatened by racists. And Howard wasn't in favor of hiring security guards. What he supported was an armed defense members being at the house. That's what stopped the racists from coming around. Because the police and the security guards were nowhere to be seen when the racists were throwing rocks and firebombs at the house. So that's the way to do it. The workers have power if it's used. So, I'm going to call on myself. So I was in the IBU when this 84 strike happened down at Pier 80 against apartheid. But before that, in 1984, I learned my first lesson. I learned it from Howard, which was, we were on strike, a small group of the Inland Boatmen's Union called Tankermen and Tugboatmen. And there was a scab barge next to the passenger ship right down at Pier 35 here. And Howard was a linesman then, and he heard that on the radio, and he contacted me immediately and said, get a picket line down there at the passenger ship. You got a scab barge there, which I was chairman of the strike committee. So immediately we had a picket line put up, and Doherty, the BA, came down to Pier 35. Now, past precedent in the ILWU is even during war, and we don't refuse to work military cargo or passenger ships. We don't strike against passenger ships. But what I learned from Howard is there's a contract, and then there are the 10 guiding principles. The contract is a compromise document with the employers. The 10 guiding principles are 100% union. And so, longshoremen saw the picket line, the BA called them down. Mind you now, they weren't doing the work of the strikers. They were working behind the picket line. They all came down, and as they're coming down the gangway, the captain is on the PA system. Get those goddamn barge off the side of the ship. They're about loading stores. We're not going to be able to sail on time. And as soon as that happened, the pickets outside, seeing all the longshoremen out honoring their picket line, understood the power of the picket line. You don't work behind a picket line, even if you're not doing scabs work. You don't work behind a picket line, pure and simple. That's the first lesson I learned from Howard, which is in line with the ILWU's Local 10 principles. Let me just tell you briefly why the ILWU principles were hammered together. It was during the McCarthy period, when trade union leaders were being deported, like Ferdinand Smith, the greatest orator of all the CIO maritime unions, was deported to Jamaica. Huey Bryson, from the Marine Cooks and Stewards Union, a majority black union, red lead, went to prison because they said he lied to Congress, that he was a member of the Communist Party. They put him in prison. They were after Bridges, trying to deport him 4 times, alleging that he was a communist. This is why they formulated the 10 guiding principles, because if Bridges and the leadership were to be silenced, then there need to be some kind of defense to stop that. And that's why we formulated the 10 guiding principles. Could I get that water, please?
What do you want?
Green cup.
Green.
Oh, that's the right one.
Oh, the cup, you want the water. I'm looking for a document.
Anyway, so that was the first lesson I learned. So this apartheid action, we hear it so often, you think, oh, they put forward a resolution to pass, no problem. But actually, to be able to organize an action like that, first and foremost, you got to organize the rank and file. You have to educate them. Leo Robinson headed up the Southern Africa Support Liberation Committee in Local 10. He educated the members of Local 10 right here in the Henry Schmidt room. Larry Wright, where's Larry? Right here. Oh, okay. Larry Wright was with the Liberation Support Committee, a movement, Liberation Support Movement. And he showed films documenting what was happening in Southern Africa, not just South Africa, but Southern Africa. And so between those educations, between the two different groups, the membership knew what was happening in South Africa. So when Howard hit the mic to make a resolution to stop that ship, it passed unanimously. Leo amended it, of course, to say, we'll work the ship down to the South African cargo, but we're not working the South African cargo. That's what passed unanimously. And by the way, actually, Leo had a motion to do that in 1976, but it sat on the shelf and was never implemented. So when Howard made the resolution, that was the first time the union, not outsiders, but the union members took action and refused to work the ship. And that resonated around the world. So there was in 87, Howard worked closely with the Inland Boatmen's Union. We were on strike. The whole coast was shut down for tugboats, barges, and so forth. And we were up against Crowley Maritime, one of the worst anti-labor organizations on the West Coast. And we had a committee of a few. There was Robert Erminger was there. Was George Gudekin's here? Howard was in that committee. Gene Weisberger of Local 34 was in that committee. And we organized actions to support the strike. And so Howard heard on his radio that there was a scab barge coming in. Oh, actually, the scab barge was already at the Oakland Army base, and he heard that they're going to shift it over to Richmond, and they did. I know I'm not going to be able to get all this in time, Kathy. Anyway, so they shifted it over. Gene Weisberger told Frank Buglici, the president of Local 34 at the time, we've got to shut the port down. We've got to march on Redwood City. And so all the ports, all the terminals were shut down. We marched the Inland Boatmen's Union and the Longshore Division of the ILWU. And we had scabs working on the barges at Redwood City. Who were the scabs? They were union scabs from other unions. The Machinists Union, operating engineers, and the laborers. These were AFL-CIO unions doing longshore work. Well, I have to say that longshoremen don't tolerate somebody else doing their work.
That's right.
And so what happened at noon, some of the workers who weren't working on the barge went through the cyclone fence, which was locked. They unlocked it and they went to lunch. Somebody forgot to lock it back up. So it was wide open. I pulled the cyclone fence back. Howard was there. He's the one that helped get all the longshoremen and clerks together, he and Gene Weisberger. We had several hundred longshoremen, and we marched down to the barge. The scabs were still on it. They jumped off the barges like rats jumping off a ship, jumped into a bus that the security guard was driving. He couldn't come towards the front gate. There were a couple cops in a car with 38 revolvers. That's 12 bullets, I guess, altogether. But we had several hundred, so discretion was the better part of valor. They didn't pull the trigger. We kept marching. They kept jumping off the ship. They got onto the bus. The security guard drove to the back gate, but it was locked. They couldn't get out. And we kept steadily marching towards them. And finally, the security guard floored it, and it went crashing through the gate to get out of there and save their asses, and they never came back again. So I'm sorry. I can't get everything in here in a few minutes. So in 1996, the international president sent me over to a conference in London for the International Transport Workers Federation, the largest organization of workers in the world, 20 million workers around the world. And I heard from Steve Zeltzer that there was an important strike going on in the port of Liverpool. So I asked Brian if I could stop by there, and he said, sure, and extend them international solidarity greetings from the ILWU, which I did. And they were astounded that that kind of solidarity came all the way from America. And there was a news blackout, and they had an interview with me. That was the first breakthrough they got in the mainstream media, bourgeois press. And it really, the news got out more and more. So other unions came to their defense as well. And they called an international labor conference in the following year. And at that labor conference, Howard came with me. And we were recruited by the Liverpool dockers to get the word out. And so the dock workers unions around the world were hearing from us here in Local 10. And that was an important struggle. Again, the problem with so many of these struggles is that they're sold out by the leadership on top, time and again. And so the lesson learned is, if you're going to fight the employers, which is backed by the capitalist government, you need to defy your union leadership. You need to fight them to get class struggle actions going. That's what happened in '34. There were three major strikes in 1934. The longshoremen, the Teamsters in Minneapolis, and auto workers in Toledo. In each case, in each of those struggles, they were led by Reds, each of those three struggles. The employers called out, and they were led by Reds, but implicit in that is they were fighting their bureaucratic union leadership. Dan Kaufman's going to talk about that later, about how these struggles happen. Often, too often, you have to fight your own international leadership to advance the struggle. And so in 1934, not only did they fight their union leadership, but the companies and the state called out the police and the National Guard to repress these strikers. And finally, what all these three strikes had in common was the police forces murdered strikers. And in San Francisco here, those murders provoked a general strike of the entire Bay Area. But that's how workers advance, is by, first of all, if your union officials aren't representing you, if they're collaborating with the company, you're going to have a fight with them first and foremost. And unfortunately, that's the state of the union. Let me just conclude by saying, one of the things that I feel proud of, Howard was very proud of the anti-apartheid action. I'm proud of, in 2008, we shut down all the ports on the West Coast to demand an end to the imperialist wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. The entire coast was shut down. And it was on May Day, and we marched with the brass band along the Embarcadero playing the International. That's the song of the international working class. That was also supported by Howard. He was involved in every one of these struggles that I'm mentioning here. And finally, what's really important to understand is real class struggle is a political question. It's the capitalist class versus the working class, as Marx said a long time ago, and the founders of this union recognized that. And we need to teach the younger workers coming in. The fight now, today, is going to be against the fascists, like the Proud Boys that are marching in San Francisco, and to defend immigrant workers in this country, and federal workers who are going to get fired by Elon Musk. We need a general strike in this country. That's what we need to work for. And to do that, we need to start building a party of our own, a workers' party, a revolutionary workers' party that's going to lead the working class. Thank you. The next speaker is Tom Riley from the Bolshevik. Tom, you're back here. Tom came all the way from Canada to speak, so Tom and Howard were in the same organization for a long time. Tom Riley.
Thanks very much, Jack. Howard had a long and complicated life, and he was, in my view, unquestionably the most outstanding communist trade union militant of his generation in America. He was politically active for 70 years, almost. First with the Communist Party, then the Spartacist League, and from 1982 right up until the end, the Bolshevik tendency. Much can be learned from his example. Let's start with his commitment to the 10 guiding principles of the ILWU, which Jack mentioned. It was also mentioned in the publicity for today's meeting. The following proposition of those principles seems to be particularly important. It reads, "We cannot adopt for ourselves the policies of union leaders who insist that because they have a contract, their members are compelled to work even behind a picket line. Every picket line must be respected as though it were our own." Howard and his comrades have consistently upheld this bedrock principle. In fact, Howard broke with the Spartacist League in 1981 over just this issue, when the SL leadership cynically told their membership to fly, 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 while PACO strikers picketed airports across the country. I met Howard and his partner Ushi the next year in Vancouver in July 1982. We spent several days in intense discussion about the Spartacist tendency, what had happened to it, and where it was headed. 3 months later, along with 4 other comrades, including Bob Mandel, who's here today, we launched the External Tendency to try to reverse what we saw as the accelerating degeneration of the Spartacist League. Howard joined the CP in 1948, but by 1961 he was thoroughly disenchanted with its overtly reformist, pro-democratic party politics. In 1974, he discovered Trotsky's critique of Stalinism, and before long he encountered a few SL supporters in the ILWU, led by Bob, who were interested in starting a class struggle caucus on an explicitly pro-socialist program. This appealed to Howard, but he was initially somewhat skeptical. But after some serious discussion, he came to see how the transitional program, written by Leon Trotsky as a sort of summary of the positions taken by the Communist International under Lenin, could provide a template for developing revolutionary consciousness within the working class. The appeal of the transitional program to Howard was that it provided means to connect the struggles for immediate practical needs of workers with the historical necessity of overthrowing capitalist rule. The idea of conducting trade union work on the basis of the transitional program, as specifically adapted to a particular industry, was one of James Robertson, the leader of the Spartacist League's most important political contributions, we think. Howard fully embraced the SL's Trotskyist program, but right from the beginning, he saw some things in the SL he didn't like, including aspects of Robertson's personal behavior. Howard was also uncomfortable with what he saw as the abject servility displayed by L. Nelson and other leading Spartacists in the presence of Robertson. And he also didn't like the unwritten rule that Robertson was above criticism. All of these things he mentions in an extensive interview which is available for anyone to listen to. Howard was an unusual and he was an immensely valuable addition to the SL cadre. He was not only an experienced militant with real political influence in Local 10, but he was also a deeply committed revolutionary and very knowledgeable, very well read. Howard was very familiar with the writings of Marx, Lenin, and eventually Trotsky. Only very exceptional people are capable of making such an abrupt political turn from critical Stalinism to Trotskyism in their late 40s. But Howard never missed a beat. He often remarked that the older he got, the more convinced he was of the validity of orthodox Trotskyism and the enormous potential of the transitional program applied intelligently in trade union work. And he did apply it intelligently. Howard was not only a founding member of the External Tendency, he was in a real way more like the founding member. In his September 1981 resignation statement from the Spartacist League, which is on page 2 of the bulletin we handed out today, he clearly identified the Roberts regime as an obstacle to building a viable revolutionary leadership for the working class. He was harshly critical of what he termed the SL's, quote, increasingly cult-like internal life, which he said was characterized by a defensive, hierarchical regime combined with a personalistic, Jesuitical method of internal argument and discussion, which had no tolerance for even the slightest disagreement with the leadership. Those of us who were in the Spartacist League in that period can confirm that that was not a bad description. At the same time, he said he wouldn't go public with his differences because he continued to agree with the SL's public program as it was presented. And this is the same policy that we in the External Tendency adopted for the first few years, modeled on Howard's previous behavior. Howard's resignation, in fact, reads like a sort of rough draft of the Road to Jimstown, the 1985 document in which we announced we were giving up on the SL after its attempted wrecking of the 1984 longshore boycott. In 1981, when he got pushed out for objecting to the SL leadership's fly, fly, fly policy on the PACO strike, Howard recognized the extent of the degeneration at the top of the SL. He certainly saw things much more clearly than we did in Toronto, where we got purged a year earlier. We hoped that the SL leadership, in which we had an unreasonable amount of confidence, would one day admit that our purge had all been a mistake. Well, that day never came, and Howard knew better than we that it wasn't going to come. Howard valued immensely what he'd learned from the SL's trade union policy, and he knew it would be criminal to abandon the work he'd been engaged in for half a dozen years of the militant caucus in the ILWU. So in January 1982, along with his partner Ushi, he launched his own publication, Militant Longshoremen, which the full run of which is reprinted in the book that's for sale here today. Howard understood that the transitional program used properly is a tool for mobilizing the working class in the direction of struggle to create a worker state to replace the existing capitalist one. One key element in this is demystifying the bourgeois state, the majesty of the law. In the Bolshevik that we handed out, we've reprinted Howard's account of the defensive struggle in Richmond in 1983, which he initiated as an example of how this can be done. When Local 10 shut down the port and mobilized 1,200 union members to run the scabs off the docks at 11 terminals, everyone who participated knew that it was illegal. But they also knew that it was necessary if the ILWU jurisdiction was going to be maintained. Howard regarded remarks by workers who participated in that action at the time that the law was really just nothing more than a tool wielded by the boss to enforce his own interests. And he saw that as evidence that the workers who'd undertaken that action had made an important step forward in their understanding of how the world worked, how class society operates. Those workers did not become revolutionaries overnight, but they learned through their own experience that with competent leadership, in some situations, it's possible to defy capitalist legality and win. The ILWU had suffered a string of defeats up to that point as a result of leadership's policy of adhering to the boss's rules. Richmond was an exception. Didn't last long, got reversed, but at that moment it was an exception. They got a contract that said that the ILWU jurisdiction would be maintained, and that was what was at stake in that strike. So instead of defeat, the Union won a limited defensive victory by direct action, by illegal activity initiated by a conscious Marxist, Howard Keylor. The next year, in arguing with and proposing the illegal action at Pier 80 against the apartheid cargo, if you look at the issues of militant longshoremen, you will see that Howard repeatedly referenced the Richmond success. Several times he said, we did it, we got away with it, we can get away with it again if we do it properly, if we organize properly. One of Howard's great strengths was his ability to think for himself. He was able to correctly assess complex situations, as he and Ushi, for example, did in East Germany, where he was living in 1989, 1990, when the wall came down. His innate political intelligence was complemented by the capacity for improvisation and a feel for rapidly developing situations. It's essential to grasp the big picture in politics, to understand the structure of class society, all the Marxist framework, but that's not enough. As Trotsky and Lenin taught, the masses of the working class are not educated by clever analysts and propagandists. What's crucial is the intervention of militants capable of gaining their trust and guiding them to revolutionary consciousness through their actual experiences. And Howard was able to do this, at least to a limited extent, in the major struggles that he led. Revolutionary class consciousness does not arise spontaneously within the working class. Howard knew that it involved the assimilation of lessons from the past via participation in the struggles of today. He also knew that however marginal the cadres who embody the core elements of the revolutionary program may be at any given moment, they are precious. Because when opportunities arise, the influence of a relatively small organization with the right ideas can expand exponentially. But conversely, a revolutionary cadre cannot be improvised on the spot. That's why he worked for decades to try to lay the basis for a viable revolutionary organization. He didn't want to waste time reinventing the wheel. He called himself Longshot O'Leary, and he knew that a successful socialist transformation requires organized continuity with the work of the revolutionary giants of the past. No organization gets everything right, but every historical moment has its own key programmatic issues that differentiate revolutionaries from pretenders. Howard was a practical guy, like Lenin, who believed that making compromises on secondary issues was often critical to being able to go forward. Questions that are of burning importance at one point can, over time, become issues that are chiefly of historical interest. Today, for example, I would cite as some major issues that distinguish actual revolutionaries would include the following. 1, standing for a Russian military victory over NATO and its proxies in Ukraine. 2, defending the Palestinians against the Zionist genocide while advocating the creation of a binational, secular worker state as part of a socialist federation in the Middle East. And 3, defending the Chinese to form worker state against imperialist aggression and domestic counter-revolution, while advocating a workers' political revolution to overthrow the ruling Stalinist bureaucracy. The two most important struggles that Howard led, the 1983 Richmond strike and the 1984 anti-apartheid boycott, also anti-imperialist, of course, grew out of work that was initiated by the militant caucus in the preceding period. The SL leadership crippled the militant caucus by decapitating its leadership, i.e. Bob and Howard. Howard's militant longshoreman work in turn laid the basis for the valuable subsequent initiatives taken by Jack Hayman, the most important of which was, as Jack mentioned, the May Day 2008 shutdown of every port in the U.S. West Coast to protest the imperialist occupation of Iraq. As the SL leadership abandoned work in the unions, it substituted a series of shortcuts, attempted shortcuts, waving the flag of the Salvadoran Popular Front, trying to hitch a ride on the coattails of Soviet bureaucrats like Yuri Andropov and General Snetkov, all to no avail. As time went on, the SL became increasingly disoriented and eventually in 2010 ended up arguing that the imperialist U.S. military was the only agency that could rescue the starving masses in Haiti. To cover its many egregious departures from the Trotskyist program it once championed, the Robertson regime began to resort to slandering its left critics, initially just the BT, but eventually the Internationalist group as well. We welcome the retraction in the latest issue of Spartacus of the filthy smear that Howard and his comrades were somehow involved with COINTELPRO or the Mossad. We particularly appreciate that the SL responded to our request that they specifically retract, in time for this meeting, the slander published in Workers' Vanguard in 1986 that Howard was some sort of union narc. The SL did meet that demand, and we've handed out copies along with our bulletin today. John Bruhl's letter on behalf of the SL's new management is, in our view, an exemplary act of elementary proletarian decency. This kind of principled behavior is unfortunately all too rare in the left, even among those who claim the heritage of Trotsky's struggle against the Stalin school of falsification. It would be gratifying if the comrades of the IG, whose principal leader, Jan Norden, edited WV at the time that slander was published, would follow the SL's example on this. The clock is ticking for those of us from the class of '68 who participated in the SL trade union work in the 1970s, the flagship of which was the militant caucus in the ILWU. It's important that we do what we can to pass on the lessons of that experience to the younger comrades who will be leading the struggles of the future. This is a period of great danger in America and internationally, obviously. But with that will come real revolutionary opportunities. The best way to honor the life and work of Howard Keylor is to carry forward as best we can the struggle to open the road to a socialist future. you very much.
Okay, our next speaker is going to be Bob Mandel. Bob was a veteran of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement. He was in SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, as was Harvey Schwartz, ILWU's historian, and myself. And he was also one of the Oakland Seven, found not guilty in a major anti-Vietnam War conspiracy trial. Bob's been to Cuba, Soviet Union, and China. His grandfather was a messenger for the Bolsheviks in the 1905 Russian Revolution. His father was Winchestered by McCarran, the McCarthy and HUAC committees, and gave one of the most impassioned, brilliant speeches defying the HUAC know-nothings that I've ever seen. You can get it on YouTube, and you should. Look under William Mandel versus HUAC. Bob was on the Warehouse Union Local 6 Executive Board for a number of years, and after leaving the warehouse industry, that Local 6 is our warehouse local in the Bay Area, he became a teacher in the Oakland Education Association and was in the executive council of that union for many years. Bob Mandel.
Today it's a difficult day. It's a difficult day because Howard is gone. It's a difficult day because fascists are walking down the streets of San Francisco. And maybe the most important thing about what's going on here today is that the program on which the Militant Caucus was built, the actions that Jack and Clarence and Brian and Lawrence have talked about, what's shown in the video, those things happened, they can happen, and they are necessary to happen if we are going to defeat this reaction which has launched itself with rocket speed. I have lived through 3 major periods of repression in my life. I was born in a family, into a family that was witch hunted during McCarthyism. My sister had her own private FBI tail. Many of us in this room lived through the government assault on the Black Panther Party and the murders of Panther leaders, the shootings at Kent State and Jackson State. So what we are seeing now is not new. That doesn't make it any less dangerous, right? When we have the Proud Boys, avowed fascists, walking the streets, sanctioned by the President of the United States, then slogans like armed workers' defense guards, to defend immigrants, to defend union strikes, to defend schools. When ICE raids schools, I'm a teacher, our union is actively taking steps towards defense work. those slogans are relevant. That program is relevant. Several of the speakers have said, but I want to quote something that always stood out in my mind from Howard. He said, a key component of winning a programmatic base is the lesson that only those who understand the state as a boss's state can even defend the basic gains of the unions. The basic gains, the right to sick leave. Joe Biden busted a railroad strike in advance over what? The demand for 1 day of sick leave. We've watched genocide. We know what this government is about, whether it's its neoliberal, war-provoking Democratic Party or the authoritarian would-be fascists of Trump. So, excuse me for the spiel, but this stuff, we are all living it. And everyone in this room, old and young, will be living it, and we need to know how to fight it. So I want to talk a little bit about how the Militant Caucus was built, because it was actually built on the heels of a massive defeat for the ILWU. It was built after the 1971-1972 longshore strike, variously reported as 130 or 143 days. Doesn't matter. The strike was over jobs, defending jobs. The strike was over shortening the work week so that as containerization took over, jobs were preserved. And some of you may remember the bay looked like a parking lot. There were 80 ships tied up in San Francisco Bay alone. The union struck for about 60 days. The government struck back with a Taft-Hartley injunction, rightly known as the slave labor law, because it reversed the victories of the 1930s battles by reinstating the right of courts to enjoin strikes, reinstating the right of judges to say, you can have 6 people on a picket line when there are 200 scabs, including scabs with guns and clubs. And the ILWU's history was that it was the first union to be hit with a Taft-Hartley in 1948. And while Jack and I have slightly different recollections of how the union defeated it, I will repeat 2 of them because they are relevant, because that law exists today, because Biden threatened to use it on the ILA, because Musk and Trump will use it against all of the beginnings of labor struggle today, Amazon or Starbucks or any further attempts to expand the UAW's jurisdiction, or the heroic strike, political strike, by the student workers throughout the UC system in defense of the Palestinians. Now, after 60 days, the government enjoined the strike. Harry Bridges, who at one time in his life was a revolutionary and had played a valuable role in building things, Harry had given up. Harry had shifted over to essentially trade craft unionism, protect one group of workers, sacrifice others. The deal he was willing to make was to protect the veterans, sacrifice everybody else. So Harry went to every port on the coast and said, you will go back to work or you will be expelled from the union. And if you're expelled from the union, then you didn't have the right to work on the waterfront because it was a closed shop. So what happened? We were born out of that defeat. People were shocked. They did not know what to do. The Pinochet coup happened, and the ILWU leadership on paper spoke out against the coup, as workers did all over the world, and unions all over the world, and they did nothing. So Howard and I and Stan and Bob Carton and Dave May and John Dow circulated a petition in Local 10 and Local 34, the clerk's local, saying we call for the immediate boycott of Chilean cargo. And we organized it from the inside using the International's own rhetoric, because the International was saying, we're against the slaughter in Chile. And we built the action and we pulled it off. It was the beginning of the revival of political strike action in the ILWU. The last previous one had been in the early 50s in the Hawaiian Islands, when the longshore section of the union shut the ports down for 4 days to defend Jack Smith, the elected communist president of the ILWU.
Jack Hall.
Jack Hall. Thank you. We are getting old. Sorry, Jack Hall. Thank you, Jack. I want to talk, my time is up, but I'm going to push it a little. I'm sorry. Something that came, because this was rebuilding, and all of us need to think about how one rebuilds now. 4 months after the Chilean action, a group of undocumented workers in Union City went on strike. Nobody ever heard of the place. It was called K&C Glass. They imported glass from Poland. They processed it and cut it in Union City. And they were illegals. Every worker in that plant, except the chief steward, a Maoist, and bilingual. Every single worker was undocumented. Every one of them had been brought into the country illegally by the union's dispatcher, who was a labor contractor. And when these folks went on strike for a union contract, he called ICE on them. Okay? So when the Militant Caucus from the beginning not only called for understanding what the boss's state is and called for a workers' government to expropriate industry, we also said oust the union leadership oust the class collaborationist union leadership. And a union dispatcher calling ICE on its own members. Well, we beat them. And how did we beat them? Local 10, but particularly Local 34. They maintained the cargo lists. They spotted the containers with the glass from Poland. It got lost for 10 days. Okay, lost. And then we went down to the warehouses in the neighborhoods around KNC at lunchtime and on breaks, and we said, look, folks, they're bringing scabs in. The private security guards had already drawn guns to escort scabs in. The court had already issued an injunction to limit Local 6 to 6 picketers against armed security guards. We went to the other warehouses and we said, it's happening down the street. If it happens to them, it's going to happen to you. And people bought it. People, including a chief steward who said to me, Bob, cut the commie shit out of the leaflets. Stop talking about injunctions and the boss's government. I said, no, Sterling, that's what's going on. He led his people out to join the picket line. There was a pitched battle with the cops and the scabs. We won. And that is the caucus that Howard Keylor built. So, there's so much more to say, as Jack knows.
Yeah,
Jack, give me 3 more quick points.
How many minutes?
Yeah, 3 minutes.
He's requesting 3 minutes. All those in favor? Aye. No. Anyone opposed? All right, Bob.
We all promised ourselves in the organizing committee we would try to be short, but it's pretty damn hard to be short in trying to pass on the things that have been burned. So, Howard, uniquely, maybe one of the only people in the world to have been assaulted physically by Harry Bridges. Dan Kaufman is in the room tonight. He's going to be speaking about the Longview strike, which was attacked, among other things, by a barge escorted by a Coast Guard cutter sent by Democratic President Obama. But the reason I bring that strike up is that in our generation, the strike at Boron was the same thing. And the International permitted massive scab herding, ordered longshoremen to handle scab goods. We fought that, and as reward for the fighting it, when 3 of us were delegates to the International Convention in 1975, speaking as an 80-year-old geriatric, Harry Bridges, then a geriatric, organized a goon squad to come out and attack us and throw over the tables and rip down the No More Boron signs. And these things have to be said not to slander. These things have to be said to understand that the pressures capitalism brings to give in, to concede, to advance one section of the workers at the expense of others is interminable, and we have to face that. So the 2 last things. Some of you remember the White Night riots when Dan White was convicted and given 2 or 3 years because Twinkies made him assassinate Harvey Milk, and Twinkies made him assassinate the liberal Democratic mayor of San Francisco. And the gay community of San Francisco rebelled and burned 29 police cars. And a couple of days later, there was a mass march of 25,000. And of course, Howard was in it. And of course, the Militant Caucus program fought from beginning to end against gender discrimination on the docks. And the last thing I'd like to say is about Zim. As several people have said, Zim does not stop in the Bay Area anymore. We drove it out. But Howard played it, and his daughter Isis and a few other people played a decisive role, because 7 or 8 days into that battle, some of us thought, and we were right in our knowledge, we knew that within the ILWU, support for the Palestinian cause was weak. What was strong was respect for a picket line. And we were thinking maybe it's time to retreat, because there's going to be another day we're going to have to fight again. And Howard and Isis and a few others, perhaps Steve, showed up at 3 o'clock in the morning to picket the ship again. And the rest is history. Zim has not returned. Thank you.
So we're going to have differences here. And this is a democratic gathering. So I will say this. I'm sure that many of the things that Bob said about Harry Bridges was true. There were undemocratic actions that he and his union leadership did against opponents. But in defense of Harry Bridges, I would say he's conflicted, like so many of the leadership. But he did things in the interest of the working class that others didn't do. For instance, at the height of the McCarthy period, where people were keeping their mouths shut, burying their heads in the sand, he defended Korea. He opposed the Korean War. You tell me another union bureaucrat in America that did that. He was opposed to imperialist wars. I give him credit for that. And one other thing. At one of the conventions, Howard stood up because there was a resolution to support the anti-communist, Reagan-supported, CIA-trained Solidarność Union in Poland. Howard opposed that resolution, and Harry Bridges went up in front of the entire convention and demonstratively shook Howard's hand to defend against anti-communist attacks on a worker state. So, what other union officials have done that? So our next speaker is Mary Jane, where are you? Mary Jane Galviso, who's a Filipino farmer and previously farm worker who worked with the communist leadership of the Farm Workers Union and in the Stockton area, Larry Itliong. So why don't you tell us about that struggle that's going on today? Mary Jane Galviso.
Well, I'll tell you the story through my discussions with Howard. I would visit him at his home. And I think when he saw me, he began to reminisce it. You know, how did it all begin for me? How did my life become a political one, right? And he told me when he got out of the military, he took the GI Bill and he went to college, like so many of them did. And he said, to support myself, I took a job working in the canneries, in the packing sheds. In those days, and still is, I mean, the United States has had one of the most racially stratified and segregated agricultural workforce. I mean, you know, when I started working, we were all Filipino crews. Now there's too few Filipinos, so we are now mixed crews with Mexicans. But in those days, it was African American workers, they pitched melons and they did cotton. Filipinos, we did the grapes and the onions, you know. We worked for the Armenians and the Italians, right? And we worked for the Japanese picking onions. I mean, it was very, very racially stratified. Well, Howard was working in a packing shed in Cortland. And as you know, that was dubbed the pear capital of the world. That's how much pears they produced. And he said, it was there that he first met Filipino workers, Filipinos. They'd come up to the shed to bring the produce in, and they were just talking union, union, union. They talked union all the time. And he said it was so exciting because it's the first time that, you know, he was drawn in, you know. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Here's a poor white boy, and he's getting all excited, you know, being with people of color, right? And he said, it's then that I really began to see and understand what was happening in our society. Well, Cortland is interesting because it has one of the largest Filipino labor camps. And it's there that they drew him in. Because the first step, of course, in the packing sheds is that you can talk union. But when you came into the labor camps, you talked a deeper political understanding. You talked about Marxism. You talked about communist theory. You talked about the ideology. And it's there that he met some of the legendary members of the Filipino labor leadership. Chris Monsalvis, who became the ILWU Local 7 president. He met and got to know Ernest Manawan. He referred to him as Ernie. He especially, I think, idolized Ernie. These two men were later imprisoned for sedition, attempted to be deported back to the Philippines. And they endured, just like so many during the McCarthy era, terrible hardship, you know, for them and their family. And so, to his credit, Howard married, you know, no, what I was going to say is that he married into my people not once, but twice. His first two wives were Filipino. And so his three oldest children, of course, are Filipino. So he became very endeared to the Filipino community. And that's really, I mean, it's his relationship and his being part of that Filipino workers community that introduced him and got him onto the path of labor militancy and also being a Marxist. I think that's important because what's the takeaway? Today, more than 90% of all workers in this country are not unionized, do not belong to a union. That's the worst of every capitalist nation on this. This is terrible, right? So the takeaway that I see is that it's true that we organize in the workplace. We also organize where workers live, where workers have a social life, and to become part of and active in their social and among their family. And that's one thing that I think that Howard's life exemplified, right? That he, you know, I'm pretty sure there were other white people there in that Filipino labor camp, but I'm sure he stuck out. I'm sure he did. But just in closing, I want to say this, because a lot of folks are misinterpreting Trump's Trump's executive order for mass deportation. People, listen. This is a declaration of war against the working class. This is a declaration of war. What Trump is doing in his pathetic way is attacking the weakest and the most vulnerable sector of our class. That's what he's doing. He's going to make them an example, but he's not going to get far, because look at all the food on that table. Who do you think planted it, picked it, and packed it? Who do you think did that? He's not going to get far, because I'm going to tell you, there's nobody else that's going to be working in those fields and orchards and dairies, okay? There's nobody else. I mean, you know as well as I, okay, there's no more black folks picking crops. There's very few Filipinos left. We're not doing that very much, right? And there's certainly no white people. Okay, so let's get real, and Trump's going to get real pretty soon. In the terms of the U.S. agricultural sector, you cannot do it without Mexicans. This country needs Mexicans. And like I said, that's what Howard learned when he got involved with those 7,000 asparagus Filipino workers. You can't do it without immigrant labor.
Our next speaker is going to be Howard's daughter, Isis. Is the mic on here or off? Here we go. Yeah, so the next speaker is Isis. Come on up, Isis. Howard's daughter. She made the video, and she worked closely with Howard defending Antifa and up in Sacramento when they were attacked by fascists up there. And Howard was always involved in defending people of the working class, even if they had different politics than he did. And that's what I liked about Howard. He was a principled fighter in the class struggle. So, Isis, say your...
Hi. I have so many stories to tell, and it's a hard day. I agree with Bob, it's a very hard day. I miss my dad, and I could sit here for, I don't know, an hour and tell you a lot of stories, and I started writing them all down, and at 4 o'clock in the morning I said, you know, I'm going to talk about what I said I was going to talk about, which is the work that Howard and I did on environmentalism and on disability justice, because those are the things that we did together. We also did some labor stuff together, but those are the things we did together that a lot of other people didn't. And I'm going to read this so that I can stay a little bit more on time. Howard was so focused on working class struggles, it may be surprising that he was also an environmentalist. He wrote about what convinced him. I bought Silent Spring when it was first published, reread it several times, stopped using DDT. Then in the mid-1970s, I returned for a visit to the rural area where I was born and grew up. The thousands of songbirds had disappeared. Unlike Howard, who grew up in nature, I grew up in the city, and it took getting permanently disabled from pesticide poisoning for me to discover the urgency of environmental activism. I was already in my 40s by the time Howard and I realized it was something we shared in common. We fought pesticide applications during the light brown apple moth program, as well as toxic vegetation management practices that target the East Bay Hills with deforestation, and the massive rollout of ever more antennas that emit radio frequency radiation associated with both health and environmental harm. I'm not the only one of his children who suffered toxic injuries, and he himself had asbestosis. So our environmentalism was very much rooted in the environmental health movement. We didn't see our environment as separate from humanity, but recognized that our health and that of our planet are connected and must be addressed together, not apart. Howard was working towards going to medical school when he quit and joined the asparagus strike. He said he had never set foot in a hospital until his first daughter was born in 1953, when he was 28 years old. He wondered if that was another reason that he had survived so long. Over the years, I saw him develop ever more distrust for the medical establishment, which seemed completely oblivious to common environmental injuries. He recognized that medical science is not immune to the influences of capitalism, and that pesticide and pharmaceutical industries are largely the same, with manufacturers producing both the poison and the cure, and that this was a conflict of interest with far-reaching consequences because the pharmaceutical companies fund medical studies, medical schools, and medical journals. Prior to becoming a longshoreman, Howard worked at a mental hospital in Stockton, the Snake Pit, where he witnessed psychiatric abuses that resulted in people often permanently incarcerated, warehoused in institutions where they were drugged, shocked, lobotomized, sterilized, and otherwise mistreated. He had some really horrible stories of so-called patients being choked out in the middle of the night because the workers were bothered by the patients. And other workers would come in the morning and would find people dead from being choked out in the snake pit. He had family members who experienced such abuses, including his brother and father, who were given electroshock and drugged. In a 2012 interview, Howard talked about this experience. You have people who have problems, or people who are considered troublesome, so you have to deal with them. Either by sterilizing them, or as we're doing now, forcing them to take psychotropic drugs and keep them in a total permanent maintenance base of psychotropics. It's the same type of contempt, a pseudo-scientific method of dealing with people with problems. It's the same kind of mindset, unscientific and inhumane and symptomatic of some of the sickness in our society. This whole question of the treatment of people with behavioral problems with psychotropic drugs is one that I've been struggling with for years, trying to talk to people who, even activists or leftists, simply don't understand the extent or depth of the damage and harm it's done to people under this rubric of mental health treatment. This is very hard for me to say. It was extremely painful to see that Howard suffered a similar plight. When he was first moved to assisted living, he was on drugs he didn't agree to, recognized that control was being taken away from him, and told a reporter of the Chronicle, "When you get to be my age, nothing is okay. You adjust to the new reality. You try to survive. My advice? Don't get institutionalized." The controls he thought he had put in place had not been filed. We managed for a while to wrangle back that control, only to have it taken away again, at which point some members of his family disappeared him. I haven't seen him in 3 years. So I want to elaborate on Howard's advice. Don't get institutionalized. Take care of your paperwork. Make sure your wishes are known, understood, and respected before you get to a point where people may not take you seriously because of how they interpret signs of your aging or your disability. The earlier you speak up and make sure your wishes are on file, the greater the likelihood they will be carried out. Howard thought he had done so, but the bureaucracy at his health insurance failed him, and so did many in his community. People who are aging have a right to self-determination, including the right to folly. And there are no medical excuses for disregarding consent. Perhaps one day more of our comrades will recognize that aging and disability are not medical conditions best left to professionals, but part of the human condition that is to be nurtured and defended. And there will be a rebellion of old radicals in the institutions. I know Howard would wholeheartedly approve. Thank you.
Our next speaker is one of the organizers of the anti-apartheid action back in '84. I don't know if you folks are familiar with The Salt of the Earth, probably the best labor movie ever made. But we have with us this afternoon the star of that movie. Larry's shaking his head. So that was a film by one of the Hollywood 10 made about a copper miners' strike in Arizona, I believe, maybe New Mexico. And the injunction prohibited the men from picketing, so the women went out and picketing. And that's similar to what happened up in Longview. The women were out on the tracks blocking trains. But Dan's going to come up in just a few minutes. But right now, Larry Wright's father, Larry Wright was a longtime member of Local 10. I worked with both him and Clarence in developing actions, promoting them, making them happen. And so Larry comes from a background where his father stood against the adversity of the capitalist government, of the FBI in particular. His father was one of the leading officials of the Mine, Mill, and Smelter Workers Union. That's a union that was destroyed by the capitalist government during the McCarthy period. And Larry, as a little kid, the FBI was tracking the family and the kids all over the place. Larry maintained a lot of the radical ideas that were inculcated in his family, and I think maybe some of that was passed on to his son, who today is an active member in Local 10. But I'd like Larry to come up and talk from the Liberation Support Movement. Larry Wright.
Well, I'll try to be brief. One thing, my father was, and my mother were in the Communist Party in the 40s and 50s, and they were involved in civil rights and anti-war. They were against the Korean War, and so they got me involved in those struggles. I resisted the draft I was drafted in 1965 to go to Vietnam. And I convinced them they didn't want me, and they let me go. Well, I want to go back to just a little bit about the action that we had in stopping the ship. You know, a lot of education went into that whole thing. I mean, somebody said that Howard was surprised that the resolution passed. I wasn't at all surprised. We formed a committee in the union with a couple of really dynamic leaders, Howard being one and Leo Robinson the other. And we were a small committee, and we were committed to educating not just the membership, but people about the struggles that were going on in Southern Africa. And at the time of the Soweto uprisings in, I think, in 1976, we formed a committee. And it was a small committee. We were sanctioned by the union, and we started doing different work. We showed a film that I had gone around and showed a lot of Last Grave at Dumbaza. It was a very good hour-long documentary of apartheid in South Africa. And we actually got the local leadership to let us show it at a union meeting, something that I have never seen before or after that. And we started doing some material support for the movements. And Leo and Howard and some of the people in our committee were able to get the shipping companies to donate containers, and we collected clothes and books and medical equipment, and it was brought to the hall and stuffed into containers, and people saw this. And we put up literature tables. There was just a lot of education that went around. We talked to church people, we talked to people in the gay community, and of course other unions. so that when the decision was made to make a resolution to stop a ship, years of work had gone into educating the membership and the community, and that's why it passed. And there were a few people in our local that didn't want to do it because it was illegal and it would mean an economic sacrifice, which it did, because we had a pay guarantee and it was an illegal action, and so they didn't pay the pay guarantee during that period. And there were a lot of people that work was slow that lost money on that. And I remember after the vote, Howard and I were talking to some of the younger guys, and a couple of the guys were talking about how they're going to lose money, they're going to lose their pay guarantee, and we were pointing out, but look at the situation. And a couple of them that I knew that were friends of mine said, F South Africa. And they didn't really mean that. What they meant was that they didn't want to do this action where they'd have to sacrifice. But when the picket line went up, it was union policy, nobody was going to go to work, but they dispatched the jobs so that people would get the job, and they'd go down there, and they knew they were going to go to work. They'd refuse to go to work. And one day, these two guys that had said that came, and I said to them, well, you know, you took the job, you know it's a sacrifice. And they said, oh, we're so proud of what our union's doing. And so it just showed that that kind of involvement and that action had a big effect and an educational effect on our membership too. And I'll let it go at that.
All right, Larry,
Thank you, Larry. So one of Howard's favorite books, which was one of my favorite books, was Storming Heaven by a woman, her last name was Giordano, I think maybe Denise Giordano. It's about the miners in the area where Howard was born, up in Appalachia. And this took place right after World War I, when there were a lot of uprising around this country because they were influenced by the Russian Revolution. We had general strikes in many cities in this country in 1919, including Seattle. But we still have those kind of struggles going on in the recent period. And one of those was the Longshore Union up in Longshore, Washington, that was fighting an international conglomerate by the name of Export Grain Terminal. It really wasn't international, it was mixed with American companies too. And these people up in Longview gave it all. I mean, as in the movie Salt of the Earth, when the women took over the picket line because the men had a junction against them, the women in Longview, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, they sat down on the train tracks and stopped scab trains a mile long from coming in. And I don't want to go into the whole detail, but a real working class hero today of workers fighting this capitalist system, all the way from Longview, is Dan Kaufman, former president of Local 21.
Well, it's been, I think, 12 or 13 years ago since we took that job action. And I want to give my condolences to Howard's family. Jack gave me a phone call one night and told me of the passing of Howard. And about maybe, a couple weeks later, he said, hey, we're going to have this memorial service and an education thing. Would you write something and email it to me, and then I'll read it in front of the body here. And I sat and went to bed that night and thought about it, and I go, no, I got to get on a plane. I made tickets the next day to get on a plane, reservations at the hotel across the street, and it's to pay my thanks to Local 10, to Clarence, to Jack. I can't name all the people that, I know on their own dime, came all the way up to Longview to support us during the strike. And when they handed us a check for $10,000, because we had a membership of 200 people. We're small. And my membership looked at that and they couldn't believe what Local 10 did for us. They don't only walk the walk or talk the talk, but they provide. I always tell people that the beacon of light is supposed to be the United States for the working people. No, it's right here in San Francisco. It's Local 10. And I really believe that. When I first got invited down here to talk to the membership, I think I came down a couple times, but to thank them for the money donations and to tell them what was going on, that when I walked into that hall for the first time, the goosebumps on the back of I was amazed. I was taken over by that place. And it meant everything to me, from the leadership from the past to the leadership at the time that when I was involved. And I know there's going to be some great leaders that are going to come after these guys. It's going to be you young kids. I don't have very good memories or thoughts about the international office. None at all. Because the 3 worst days of my life was when they called these presidential meetings, and I swear to God, they were the first things that was created by the administration at that time. I never heard of a presidential meeting for just presidents alone, and I doubt if they've even had one since. But they brought me and some of my members of my local down just so they could chew our ass, put us in line, and tell us that, hey, this is the way it's going to be, and if you don't like it, you can pay the lawyer fees and you can pay the court costs, which went into the hundreds of thousands, I know they did. And got told by not only the administration at that time, that there's only one general, and it's not you. I wasn't trying to be a general. I was just trying to lead a fight against a multinational corporation at that time. And then the person that yelled at me the most was a Coast Committee man that said, you're going to cost this union nothing but millions and millions of dollars, and screamed across the table at me. Well, it turns out to be just a few years ago, he's the one that cost this ILWU millions and millions of dollars. But anyway, he talked about the plight that we went through. We had 3 guys that spent over a month in jail for blocking trains, trespassing charges. Many of us officers spent at least 1 day in jail. But I look back at it, and I honestly think that I didn't really want to run for the presidency at that time. I've been on labor relations committees for a few years, but some of the old timers like Arnie Ogden, Kenny Swicker, Carl Nice, Jim Burgoyne, they approached me and said, you have to do this. The guy that was running for the president had only been in the union just a short period of time, and they said, we need somebody that's got some, whiskers on their chin to take this on, and you have to do this. So I did it on the respect of my elders. I did it for Kenny and Arnie, Carl Nyes, and Jim Burgoyne. But in honesty, I came here to thank these gentlemen right here, because I know they came up numerous times. And what had happened is that we had these labor council meetings scheduled. One was in Portland one night, I believe on a Friday night. And then the following night, we had another labor council meeting in Seattle, to where all the local laborers of our area, the unions, came to these labor temples to hear our side of the story, to give us support and to give us encouragement. But these meetings at these labor temples were sabotaged by our own international higher-ups. Right. And I'm going to tell you the story. It's the truth. Here it is 12 years later, but I'm going to tell you the truth. They disrupted with chaos. They turned the lights out, silenced the mics, did everything they could. And after the first night in Portland, I get back to my car to go home, and I got all these voicemails and text messages from Leo Sundad. What the hell are you doing? We told you couldn't talk. So the next night, I know it was Clarence and 2 of my good friends that have since passed, Norm Parks and Jack Mulcahy and Jack, and I think Smooth was there. There was a number of guys. And so we started out of town, and just because of the pressure I was getting from the international higher-ups, we got about 2 miles out of town, and I told Jack to turn the car around, that I had to go back. I couldn't go to Seattle. And it's because of the pressure that was put on me. I was in a no-win situation. Here I was fighting multinational corporations, but I was fighting my own international officers at the same time. So these guys went to Seattle, and the same thing happened there. They called Tacoma, Seattle, Vancouver, Portland, and these guys showed up from our union to sabotage these meetings. And why they didn't want us to talk or tell them what was going on is beyond me. I still to this day sit and think about it all the time. Why would they do this? Why? I mean, these people were here to support us. These were union people, unions throughout the whole area. But that's what happened. But in retrospect, I look at, and I know I'm going to talk for my membership and my 200 people. We're up to about 300 now. But we have a soft spot in our hearts for Local 10. I mean, they were truly our friends, and they were the first people to come to help us. And we will never forget that, and my membership will never forget that. I have 3 generations of longshoremen in my family. My dad's 91 years old. He's still alive to this day, farting a hot skillet. I'm not kidding you. He drives and goes to this day every day. He will not slow down. But strong union man, and during the pickets, he was the first one to go to jail because he hit the cop cars with eggs. But I got 3 of my children. I have 4 children. I got 3 of them that are longshoremen, a daughter and 2 sons. My son just stepped down as vice president. He's got a couple young kids that are athletes, and he's coached them all the way throughout like I did. I didn't get into politics till late because I coached baseball year round, and he's doing the same thing. But I can see someday that he will be president of our union. He's that type, and he's well respected and well liked within our union, and he'll pick up where the others have left off. But one last thing, I know my time's limited and short, and I'm going to get out of here in just a second. But the young people in this room, it's going to be up to you. And what Tom talked about, the 3 things, the last 3 things he talked about, spot on, brother. Spot on. You said it. And that's what we're up against. We're fighting the fascists of this country. And until the banking system, the Federal Reserve, and the globalist bankers, until we take care of them, we're going to be fighting this battle forever. But anyway, I want to thank Local 10 again, and thank you for inviting me to this. I learned more here in 3 hours than I did in 4 years of high school. But I want to thank you, and thanks for the invite.
Local 10 that went to South Africa 2 years ago. Newt is the nephew of Huey Newton of the Black Panther Party. We've always had members of the Black Panther Party here, like Clarence. But David Newton is now an officer in the ILWU, and he was one of the leading members that went to South Africa. He's going to read a statement by the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa. Newton.
Good evening. I know people are restless and want to get some food. I'll be really quick and brief. Representing Local 10 here this afternoon on behalf of Big Brother Jack Heyman, Big Brother Clarence Thomas, Big Brother Tebow somewhere out here. And I have to mention Steve Zeltzer, who is a stomped down soldier sitting here in the front. If it hadn't been for him, I don't know if I would have participated with the South Africa movement. So thank you, Big Brother and Ms. Zeltzer. This message is from Irvin Jim, who is the General Secretary of NUMSA, South Africa. And he wanted to thank Brother Keylor for his life work and his participation in the message goes like this. The National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa, better known as NUMSA, sends its deepest condolences to our allies, the International Longshore Warehouse Union Local 10, on the passing of Comrade Howard Keylor. May his soul rest in peace. The message is a little longer than that, but I'll sidetrack just a little bit. Myself and Jack Heyman met Brother Jim in South Africa, and the movement is real. The movement is beyond real. One thing that he brought to light with us was the constant struggle that we share with our allies. As he stated, we have common goals and common interests. One of our main and probably the only strength is our strength in labor. We both have that. We share that from coast to coast around the world. Brother Steve Zeltzer is part of WIN Group, Worker International network, and they keep everybody on course of today's action. So we have an Orange Man president, which it took me 2 hours to get here because of the Proud Boy protest downtown. We also had issues with all of the presidents that sat in the seat. So adversity is not new to the waterfront, it's not new to any of us here. We're all soldiers of the struggle. With that being said, we had to pay homage to this brother, Keylor, who brought us here today. And I know we're hungry and we want to get this food. So without further ado, I want to say thank you, Brother Keylor. Thank you to all his friends and comrades for coming here to Local 10. We will keep this fire burning. We will not unload boxes or weapons of destruction and genocide in 2025, as we did not going back to this brother's time starting in 1953, I believe. So power to the people, rest in peace our soldiers.
Now we're going to hear a recording from the most well-known class war prisoner in America, Mumia Abu Jamal.
Howard Keylor, A Life of Labor and Liberation. For Howard Keylor, a long life in service to the working class began in his younger years in Ohio, where he saw miners going to work in rural Ohio, not far from the Appalachians and near the mines. He grew up with a strong sense of solidarity among workers. He became registered as a longshoreman in 1959 when he found his political footing as a radical trade unionist and a revolutionary activist for his class and especially other dock workers. He constantly used the docks as a basis for organizing workers while opposing the rulers. When South Africa was gripped in the knot of apartheid, Keylor raised a motion to refuse to remove cargo from South African vessels. To his surprise, the motion passed unanimously by the members of the ILWU, or the International Longshoremen and Warehouse Union, Local 10. This action earned the praise of South Africa's Nelson Mandela, who commended Local 10 during his 1990 world tour. Mandela said Local 10, Howard Union, was on the front line of the global struggle against the racist system of apartheid. That's what was the workers' united vision of Howard Keylor. Howard Keylor was, in essence, a lifelong revolutionary who greeted all struggles as a challenge to be met and beaten. He fought for social justice and a better world. He fought against my death sentence and for my freedom. He is remembered as a man who made every one of his 98 years count. Howard Keylor's extraordinary life for labor and liberation. Thank you, brother. With love, not fear. This is Mumia Abu Jamal.
So we're on the open mic section, and we have a statement of condolences and solidarity from Australia, from the former president of the Queensland branch, Bob Carnegie. He writes, "Revolutionaries such as fellow worker Keylor pass our way only rarely, but leave a mark on our lives that time will never erase. Howard chose the difficult road of unflinching principles on all issues in the working class movement, whether it was fighting for a better life for longshore workers, initiating worldwide solidarity against the apartheid state of South Africa, or denouncing Stalinism. Comrade Howard Keylor was front and center in demonstrations and on the picket line. As the fine comrades assembled celebrating Howard's wonderful life, I think of Howard through some Australian working class poetry. From the great shearers, that's the sheep shearers in Australia, some of the great shearers' strikes of the 1890s, part of which goes, wherever the march of oppression may reduce a land to despair, know how mighty the victor, the flag of rebellion is there. Howard Keylor truly lived the rebel's life. To Howard's family, friends, and fellow workers, Howard may not be with us physically, but wherever working people fight for something better, Howard Keylor's spirit will be there. Bob Carnegie, former Secretary of the Queensland branch of the Maritime Union of Australia. And now, the first speaker under the open mic is Jane Jules, who was active in the Stop Zim Action Committee that helped us to stop Zim from coming into the port of Oakland. Jane Jules.
Howard Keylor devoted his whole life to helping the oppressed and disadvantaged people, in particular, from my point of view, the Palestinian people. Down a bit? Okay. I would like to talk about his work with the Stop Zim Action Committee back in 2014. The container ship Zim Shanghai belongs to an Israeli shipping company, and it was at this time that Israel was mercilessly bombing Gaza back in 2014. Things haven't changed. I first met Howard Keylor at a meeting at the Stop Zim Action Committee to plan the picketing of the Zim Shanghai, which was due to arrive in the port of Oakland on Saturday, September the 27th. At that meeting, there were Palestinian activists. I knew all of them because I've been in the Palestine activist world for a long time. But also there were a lot of big, muscular men who obviously worked at the docks. But sitting next to me was this man of modest build, an elderly gentleman, and I was thinking, why on earth is he here? I had no idea that this was Howard Keylor. I didn't even know about him because I was in England at the time when he did the anti-apartheid action just jump-started in the USA. We were all busy boycotting South Africa in England at the time, but it hadn't got rooted in the USA until Howard Keylor gave everybody a kick to get started. So this petite elderly gentleman, I realized it was a great honor to sit next to him, even though I didn't realize at the time. So using my navigation apps, I tracked the Zim Shanghai that was coming up the west coast, all the way from the Panama Canal, past the Central American countries, Mexico. It went past Los Angeles, remember that, and up to the Bay Area. And I noticed a very strange thing. Most of these container ships go at a maximum of about 16.8 knots. But this ship sped up to 20 knots, which is not cost effective for a ship of that size going at that speed. And I thought, this is something strange going on. It's well ahead of schedule, and it was going to be even more ahead of schedule. Remember, it was due to come in the early hours of the Saturday. And I wondered, are they going to try and sneak in on Friday and outwit us? And that's exactly what they were planning, to come in early so that all the activists who were going to do the picketing would come on Saturday to find the ship had already unloaded and it was leaving. So I tweeted out to everybody, get there on Friday evening. I think it's coming in early. And a few minutes after I tweeted that, the ship slowed down. It was like playing with a remote control. When I said it's going to come in on Friday, it slowed down. When I said, no, it's coming in on Saturday, it sped up. It was amazing. I was sitting in my garden with my remote control, controlling this enormous container ship. Well, eventually, all the picketers went on both Friday and Saturday morning, so it was covered. Only one person broke the picket line, and I don't know anything about dock work, but I imagine it was quite a challenge for one person to try and unload an entire container ship. I think you need a whole team, don't you? So anyway, the picketers were successful picketing the ship on both Saturday morning and Saturday evening, and then the Zim Shanghai gave up. They'd already had a 4-day delay back in August. They didn't want this again. It cost them probably about $1 million or more. So then the ship went all the way back south, down to Los Angeles to unload there. And then it had to go north again on its way to Russia. By this time, it was 5 days late. So I want to thank all the people in Local 10 for honoring the picket line, apart from that one person, but he didn't do much work that day, I don't think, on his own. And I want to acknowledge Howard Keylor's work on the Stop Zim Action Committee for taking part in this amazing action. And since then, no Zim ship has ever come back to Oakland. Thank you. Thank you, Local 10.
Thank you, Jane. Yeah, I just want to add one thing about chasing Zim out of the port. The last time in 2014, what Jane was reporting on, the ship was at berth 57, SSA, and we had an arbitrator decide that it's not the protesters that endanger the longshoremen going to work, it's the police, as it was in 1934 when they murdered strikers. We used that arbitration against the employers. And so the employers came back in September when the Zim ship was in and said, okay, if you dispatch the jobs for the night call, we won't have any police out there. So Howard and I devised the scheme where not only were we going to picket, we used our vehicles to block. There was no way you can get through the picket. The picket was the cars and trucks that we had. We only had about 30 picketers. Longshoremen were coming in to go to work, and they saw this blockade of the port. A cop came up to Howard and me, and he said, you guys think you could move your vehicles so that these guys could go to work? And Howard and I just looked at each other and laughed. We weren't going to move anything. And that's when you have the power of the working class. We can stop the police if we're united together under one solid program and leadership. So I'd like to now have all of the planning committee that organized this event to come to the front, please.
Stop. Matt and Yvonne made a video. Please play the damn video. We're going to play it after the International. We are. What? It's just the International.
Yes, Masha, come up.
Okay, if you have the International in front of you, fine. If you don't have it, you may remember it. I don't know. Okay. International. So, there's a mic over here for people. Elliot, there's a mic over here. We need people to cover the mic.
You want someone shooting on the mic?
Yeah, yes. All right, there's another one. All right, my voice is gone. So, we're ready. Start it. Come on, Richard, don't be afraid. Ye prisoners of salvation, arise, ye wretched of the earth, for justice undoes condemnation, a better world's in birth. No more traditions change, they'll bind us like slaves, no more enthroned. The earth shall rise on new foundations. We have been on, we shall be all.